Hi, this is Bob Byman for your next round. You know, there are two aspects to the swing that are commonly misunderstood by most golfers. And I mean most golfers, I'm talking all the way down to probably anybody 3 handicap or even above. And even some misunderstanding on part of this from even the best players in the world. I want to talk today to you specifically about the arc of the swing from the front view, and then the plane of the swing from the back view. Okay? So let's talk about the arc first. Okay, from a natural, wonderful starting position, nice and balanced, generally speaking, the arc in the loading motion is fairly circular in nature, but it's not quite. Because we have 2 pivot points in our golf swing, the right foot's the pivot point in the load, and then the left foot is the pivot point in the unload, the arc in the loading motion will have a slight elliptical tone to it. Okay, so it's not exactly circular. So in the loading motion, as you start back and you start transferring your weight very, very slightly in the beginning, it gets the club moving. Okay, and then the upper body, the trunk of the body starts to rotate. So the arc is really quite wide here. It's in an elliptical fashion. You go all the way up to the top of the backswing. Now as you start back down with the lower body and the upper body, arms and hands start to follow, you'll notice that the club head is well inside of the arc that you started with in the loading motion. So the arc is out here, then it comes in very narrow or more narrow, it comes back down, and then it gets even wider on the other side. We start 50-50, we go 75-25, and then 100-0. That's what creates the width of the arc this way, narrow here, and then wide again on this side. Okay, it's very, very important that everybody understands that your head is not your pivot point. If your head was your darn pivot point, and you only had 1 point to draw around, then the arc of the club that is being generated around it would be a circular arc. Now if you had a pure circle and your head is behind the ball, the bottom of that arc would be behind the ball. And this is what people do all the time. They have a circular arc going back and then coming down, and the bottom of their arc is behind the ball. This is why they hit it fat and thin all the time. Now good players have more of an elliptical arc. They have an elliptical arc based on that the head is not a pivot point. The feet are the pivot points. So you go wide, in, and then even wider. Okay? That's very important. Let's come around and let's talk about the plane of the golf swing now. Okay, so here we are again in our starting position, nice and balanced on our feet. Everything is in tone. Okay, so I want you to imagine that there's an angle from the ball to the tops of my shoulders now. Okay, so there's the angle. It goes up this way. You'll notice that my arms and hands in the club are underneath that angle to start. So as you flow away in the beginning of the swing, whatever angle this shaft creates at address is pretty much maintained as you're flowing away, and the club will get somewhere into there. But by the time the shaft is about hip high or so, just maybe up above hip high, the palms of your hands, the shaft, and the forearm of your left arm is parallel but underneath that original angle that I talked to you about. Now Ben Hogan explained this as well as anybody who has ever explained it in his book, The 5 Lessons of the Modern Fundamentals of Golf. Okay, so here we are again. You go back, here we go, and about halfway up, the shaft is parallel but underneath that pane of glass that he talked about. As you continue on, it stays parallel, 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 but underneath it, as you reach the top of the backswing, now the top of the left arm and hand is just underneath that pane of glass. Okay, now, most people have understood that reasonably well. That's fairly intuitive. Now, the unload is a little bit more complicated. To really, really hit the ball well now. Here's the pane of glass here at address. But in the unload, it changes its orientation relative to the ground, relative to the target, and it's in a very different position relative to the actual angle relative to you. So here's the angle here. The bottom edge is going right down the target line. In the unload, the leading edge of it comes off the ground slightly, comes this way. We get slightly flatter, and the angle of the pane of glass is actually angled very slightly out to the right. Okay? So it's angled out to the right, it's slightly flatter, and the leading edge is off the ground. What that means to you is that here you go, you're making your loading motion, and here you are at the top of your backswing, the club's in plane. As you start back down in your unload, the lower body starts and it drops the club into a slightly flatter plane and coming slightly from the inside. Now, most players are taught today when the shaft is parallel with the ground, that this shaft should be parallel with the target line. Hogan did not do that. And I think that that is the one reason this guy hit the ball better than anybody in the history of the game. It gives him a slight insurance policy to make sure the ball never starts left. So here we are, we come back down, and by the time the shaft is parallel to the ground, it's angled just a fraction out to the right. Comes back down into the ball, and then you go all the way through to the finish. This is critical now. So the pane of glass in the loading motion is angled right down the line, and then it shifts this way, flatter out to the right, and the leading edge is a little bit off the ground. This is Bob Byman for your next round. That's going to help you. Practice that and enjoy.